Turn-based strategy games are one of the most incredibly immersive, fun, and replayable types of games out there. Just take a look at Fire Emblem Three Houses. I have over 300 hours of playtime in that, and I still want more. I still love playing that game. But a lot of times, after playing through some of your favorite games multiple times, you just want a different take on some of the ideas that are the core of this genre. And for that, I have put together a list of 10 of the most underrated strategy and turn-based tactics games out there. I hope that you can find at least one from this list that completely draws you in and that you have fun playing, and we will get started with number 10. Starting off with an interesting one, Black Legend is a kind of post-apocalyptic, almost like Plague Doctor style strategy game, and that idea really interested me enough to just give it a try, look into it, and I was quite pleased. It's got a lot of really unique systems in it, including a kind of hilarious character editor where you have the choices of ugly character or even uglier character. And then the entire world really fits that same idea where it's gritty, there's just kind of random disgusting creatures roaming around. It is a very post-apocalyptic, plague-ridden little city that you are headed into. Beyond that, the actual gameplay is deep and has a lot going for it. There's a really cool skill and class system where you can kind of reclass into any of your currently unlocked classes, but in order to unlock the skills that class uses, you have to find weapons that give that skill. And then as you are using that weapon, you will eventually have used it enough that you permanently unlock that skill for the class. This can be everything from having a sword that you unlock a counterattack if a person attacks you in melee, or if you have a gun and you learn a shrapnel shot that shoots at an entire wide swath of enemies, that once you have learned it from whatever weapon you are using, you permanently can use that with any other gun in that class. It's a really cool system and makes it feel very rewarding to kind of swap in between classes every time you get new weapons or armor, check out what the skills do on all of the different classes. The combat itself is pretty simple. You can move and attack in any order, and as you're attacking, there is a catalyst system that's pretty interesting. There's 4 different colors, and when you get 2 colors built up that kind of go together, you can use a catalyzing attack, which is basically just an attack that every single class has access to with whatever weapon they're wielding, so swords, guns, anything. And then if you have those catalysts built up on an enemy, the catalyzing attack will do a huge chunk of bonus damage and remove the catalysts. And you can stack that multiple times for a single catalyzing strike. So if you have 3 catalysts built up and you hit them with a catalyzing strike, it just does massive damage. So that brings a lot of really cool setup and planning where your characters maybe only have access to 1 or 2 of the different colors of catalysts, and so you team up to build up the catalysts on an enemy and then finish them off with a big catalyzing strike. Really rewarding, very fun to pull off, and it's a super in-depth system where you can get all sorts of attacks that build up multiple different colors or multiple stacks of a color but have some drawback, or you can even use buffs that like increase your attack at the cost of it's giving yourself red catalysts or things like that. Really cool system, really awesome. Those are kind of the pros, I would say, for this game. As far as cons go, the movement, camera, and the menus can all feel kind of awkward, just a little unpolished, but nothing that really takes away from the game. and the overworld system of random battles where basically you can just be walking along and it will show you the vision cone for enemies, and when you walk into that vision cone, the battle starts. It can be a little tedious if you're trying to avoid battles, but overall, fantastic game, really good one to start off our list, and Black Legend, if that seems like something that interests you, go and give it a try. The next game is TroubleShooter Abandoned Children is like the subtitle, at least of the version I got, but TroubleShooter is the game. And honestly, if I could describe this in one sentence, it would be XCOM with anime characters. Like, that is a pretty good summation of what this game is. It has basically just a pure copy of the XCOM combat style, where you have your movement that you can still take an action after, or sprinting, and the way that the maps are laid out with low cover, high cover, very, very reminiscent of XCOM. But as far as the anime characters go, a lot of the characters that you're gonna get are basically just like straight up anime swordsman, anime fist fight, but use lightning, has a giant sword with like explosive powers, and they do a really good job of making those abilities that each of the characters has very unique. So that is one thing that is very different from XCOM, is that you have very specific set characters that you're using rather than just kind of random generics that you have a lot of customization with. The characters themselves are very set in stone, but you do have lots of options of which characters to use and how you want to kind of customize their abilities. And they do a really good job of mix and matching. You know, if their basic attack is a charge-in melee attack with a sword, then they do a good job at feeling like it's balancing out, where you can also get multiple ranged abilities, support abilities, disruptive abilities. So even though there is a very large focus on the melee aspect of it, they do a good job of balancing out characters. So it's not like every single one of your characters is a ranger from XCOM 2 that's just charging in with a sword and like wiping out the enemy. Personally, one of my favorite abilities is the chain lightning ability that you get on one of the characters that is just so satisfying and fun to use. And so they do a really good job at making it fun to use the characters they give you, and making the options that you have with each character very rewarding. And that includes an incredibly in-depth mastery system, equipment system, leveling system that honestly can be a little overwhelming when they throw you straight into it, but there is a lot of really fun kind of learnability there and customization. And honestly, I feel like I quite enjoyed the approach that I took, where it was like I found one or two cool ones that seemed like they fit each character, threw them on, and then I didn't worry about like checking every single new mastery I get to see if it's slightly better than one of the ones that I have, and reorganizing their mastery tree every single time that you unlock something. Like, you could, if that's something that appeals to you, of getting lost in the details in between every single battle and like really honing in on the optimization, this game has it for you. But honestly, I haven't felt like I have been hindered by not like fully diving into that every single chance that I get. And I'm playing on, I think, just the regular hard mode. There's one difficulty higher, and it's been very good. So I have really enjoyed this game. I have not actually finished it yet, but I'm most of the way through. And one thing that I've noticed is that the farther I get into it, you kind of have a lot of options for side missions that get a little meaningless, grindy feeling, but there is a lot of fun just to be had, even if you are absolutely just wiping the floor with kind of random side missions. And overall, it is a very fun game. Highly recommend. Alright, coming in at number 8 is Achtung, Cthulhu tactics, however you say these words. Obviously, it's one of those that it's like you recognize the word every time you see it because this is a pretty cool genre, but it still feels weird to say it out loud, so apologize about that. This is another one that's kind of similar to Black Legend, where it's like it's got this very creepy, dark vibe to it, which is really fun in a tactics game because it feels very different from a lot of the ones that I'm accustomed to playing. And I really enjoyed the setting and the setup for this game. It's a World War II, Nazis have a secret division that is researching these crazy Cthulhu monsters and how to use them. And you are a team of specialists that gets basically half stranded and then sent in to rescue behind enemy lines and figure out what this secret section is up to. It is really short of a game. Probably just didn't have like that huge of a budget and everything, but I think that it works really well for the game that it is because they have a ton of really cool ideas that really draw you in, but they don't overstay their welcome. And I think if it was a longer game, you'd get pretty tired of just seeing the same enemies over again, having the combat system kind of devolve into the late game systems that you get. And I think they did a really good job of balancing it. So you definitely do still get a little tired of enemy repetitiveness, but it is a lot of fun to be able to see your characters grow and kind of mold that into how you want to make them. As an example, I had turned one of my characters into just a super accurate crit machine that could fire basically forever. Because they have a really cool system called momentum points in this, where outside of your normal action points you get every turn, you have momentum points that either build up over time, happen when you accomplish some task, and you can use those for extra actions, as well as normally to pull off some of your stronger abilities, you need to use momentum points in addition to your action points. And I had one character that could use a momentum point, and if they were able to connect the hit, they would gain back the momentum point. So it was incredibly fun to make them like super accurate and could kind of just machine gun down people. Obviously there's limits in place for kind of anything like that that's would be too broken if you could really abuse it, but it was very powerful and very fun to kind of see the skill tree at the start of the game and be like, hey, I think that's where I want to take this character, is building in this direction, and then see the kind of fruition of that and feel like it was really powerful at the end of the game. So that skill system and the characters that they give you is really rewarding. But again, I feel like they do a good job of not overstaying their welcome with pushing out the content too much, because you finish out kind of whatever branch of the skill tree that you're really wanting to focus in fairly close to the end of the game, and then you can see that kind of ultimate build that you gave to your character, but you don't get stuck in grinding forever. So really great game, but just not crazy deep, crazy like long. You could definitely get a lot of replayability out of it, but the only reason that it's ranking a little bit lower on this list is it is like just a little shorter. Like I think I have maybe 20 hours, 25 hours in this game, and feel like I'm pretty happy. Like eventually I'll come back for a second playthrough probably, but pretty happy, whereas like a lot of these other games I'm 50 plus hours. So if you're looking for something shorter, honestly, this would probably be one of my top recommends out of this list. Really fun game, very unique setting, really cool. Alright, next up at 7, we have Empire of Sin, which this one I actually do remember hearing about and seeing in kind of its early pre-release stages and right when it came out. So I do still think that it belongs on this underrated list because they have made a lot of changes to it from what I remember of those early stages, and I really don't see anybody talking about it now, and I think that there is a lot of really great potential for fun in this game. So going off of that, this is a gritty gangster mafia. You control one, faction, and you're basically trying to take over the entire city. And honestly, I feel like this has one of the best management and combat balances for these style of games. There are definitely some that focus more on combat in this genre. I would put Fire Emblem in there all the way probably up until Three Houses. Like Three Houses, you had a lot more into the management side with the monastery. But then you have like the XCOM style where combat is really important, but a huge part of it is managing your base, your research, getting everything like that allows you to really perform in combat. And I think Empire of Sin actually balances that even better than some of those kind of more well-known games that have that style, where you can really use your management of your empire, building money, building, breweries and speakeasies and everything like that, to like strongly augment your game, whether that be using that money to just purchase crazy power in the combat side, or using that money to buy out and intimidate rivals into like giving up some of their holdings, actually just buying out entire factions of enemies if you have the resources and if you've maneuvered yourself with the diplomacy system. So it feels a lot more like you can go kind of in any direction you want and be able to really perform. Personally, my first playthrough, I went just full in on the combat, and I absolutely love the skills, the items that you can use in combat. Makes it really interesting, but like a single battle is pretty fast paced, so it doesn't get drawn out. With that, they do sometimes get a little repetitive, especially if you're fighting weaker enemies. Just getting rid of people that have been squatting in empty places that you're going to take over. It can kind of get a little too easy and repetitive if you kind of figure out ways that your character and their abilities can be abused, because I think that's just one of the issues with the balancing, where you can do a split of kind of any management, money, diplomacy, combat. So if you really focus into one, I feel like both with going into the money side and the combat side in my playthroughs, I felt that I've gotten a little too overpowered, honestly. And like the last fight in the game, I'd end in a single turn or just like completely buy out my final rivals. Stuff like that, where they give you a ton of freedom and you can really push that to your benefit in this game. So whether that be a pro or a con for you, I could see it going both ways, but it is really fun to have that. And if you enjoy the systems that they present, I think that multiple playthroughs of this can really be enjoyable to try out some of the other tactics that you haven't used so far. One other thing that I will say is kind of a negative for me is that there is quite a bit of language and swearing in this game. And for me, I was playing it on my Switch, so it's like if I'm ever just playing around while watching shows with my wife or with my daughters around, it's like, okay, volume is all the way off for this game, and I couldn't find any options to change that. So that is something to keep in mind if that's something that you are concerned about. But overall, really awesome game. And has had a ton of updates to it. So even if you have heard of this before, back when it first came out, I would recommend at least looking into all of the changes, and if you want to get it, because they have really updated a lot of balancing and making the game more in-depth in its strategy so that you can't abuse the systems quite as much. And I think that that makes it have a lot more fun and replayability to the systems because you can't like abuse the loopholes quite as much. So awesome game. Number 6 is Phoenix Point, which is another XCOM style game, and this one is really awesome because actually kind of the original creator of XCOM, this is one of his projects that he's worked on since leaving that original team, and you can really feel the inspiration, but it also has some really unique takes on some of the ideas, and it's honestly feels kind of like an evolving of that style of XCOM into a different direction. I really like it. With kind of the basis of the game being, instead of aliens invading, it is now mutated sea creatures basically that you could, sell as aliens to anybody. So kind of hilarious, just that little, it's not aliens, it's not XCOM, but you definitely get that same feeling. But some of the really unique systems that this game has is there is a really cool aiming and body part targeting system in Phoenix Point where you can either like completely disable a body part by doing enough damage to it. You do more damage to other certain less armored body parts if you can get the accuracy to target them. It makes having snipers actually really, really fun because you might have a certain enemy that has a giant hunk of basically shield on its arm that it likes to kind of set up facing in your direction, and if you're really accurate you can kind of see like, oh, sticking out from the side of the shield is their lower back and their spine that has like very low armor. You can do a lot of damage to it, and so if you can get that perfect snipe off, where obviously there's still some randomness with how the aiming works, just with a like 50% chance to be within the inner radical, and then everything will be within the outer radical. It's really cool. Reticle, sorry. It's really cool. I love this system. It feels very satisfying, and you can have very big impacts from disabling body parts, even if you're fighting other humans. Like you can shoot the gun out of their hand basically, and if they don't have a backup weapon or grenades or anything, like you can kind of figure out ways that shooting a weapon out of their hand completely disabled them, where now they can like run up and try to punch you and are basically just sitting ducks. So it's really cool. I love that system, honestly, more than like anything else in this game. That system alone sells it and makes combat really fun and engaging no matter what you're fighting against. But in addition to that, there is also a very cool management side of managing different weapons, resources, technologies, doing research to improve your units, to figure out kind of the main plot of the game and how you're going to defeat these sea creatures. And overall, it's just got a lot of depth to the systems that makes it fun to continue playing. It can start to drag a little bit by the end is what I found, but then you hit a point where it kind of snowballs into the finale, and the overall experience is still really great, even if, depending on how you set up your researches and everything, you get to a point where you're kind of like waiting for things to happen and not having very important things happening. And that kind of is a fault of the clunkiness just of the research, the exploration, figuring out where everything is on the world. Like, it's a cool system, but it can, depending on how you tackle it, either really speed things up or feel like the game is starting to drag if you're trying to figure things out. Overall, still an amazing game, very fun in this kind of more XCOM-like style of tactics games. If that's something that interests you, honestly, for the combat alone, I would say that this is a fantastic game. It's very, very fun to be in battle, and the setup to get into it is also really fun, but the combat alone is definitely the selling point of this game. Coming in at number 5 is Banner of the Maid, which, and I mean this in the best way possible, is the most Fire Emblem feeling game on this list. And again, I think that is a great thing. It is a French Revolution era strategy game that kind of the idea of it is a lot of the maids that you control, which is kind of the name that these people have been given, harness a like secret inner power that basically translates into skills very similar to Fire Emblem skills, where it's not as much like active skills that you're using. Some cases they are, but they're just benefits that that particular unit has on the battlefield that really sets them apart from other units in their class. Really cool system. The artwork is absolutely amazing in this, and the units are all really cool and unique. Personally, I love just like the level up in the stat system. Again, it feels very Fire Emblem, where you have basically like a defense and a resistance, and speed, agility, accuracy. Very understandable, very easy to get into if you are coming from a Fire Emblem background. I really like all of the maps and the animations, the story of this game, and getting into some of the actual combat systems. I actually really love the weapon durability system that they have in this game. Like, personally, it might be one of my favorite ways that this has been implemented into a game, where you have basically every map fresh uses of all of your weapons, but all the weapons have very limited uses, especially if they're powerful. Like, you might have a 1-2 range weapon that, you know, obviously has a ton of utility because you can use it to counter people attacking from multiple ranges, you can attack without being countered, but not only does it give you a drawback to your speed, but it also only has like 4 or 5 uses every single map. And throughout the game, you can get multiples of those, you can upgrade them, but you're still constantly, like, as you're going into battle, kind of planning out, like, okay, I have this many uses of this specific utility or really strong weapon. I have kind of my more standard one that has a lot more uses that I can use to clear out all of the remaining units. I love the weapon durability system. I think it is really, really cool. In addition to that, I really like the outside of battle systems, where you are back in Paris and you get to kind of build reputation with different factions that are going on around the French Revolution. And as you're building those reputations, you're unlocking new shops for each of them that kind of specialize in different units, promotion items, stat boosters, and you actually do have to make choices in between some of the different factions as you're going along, which is really cool. I really enjoy basically all the systems in this game. I think that it is absolutely fantastic. The only negative I could possibly say is that you do have access to kind of unlimited grinding. It can feel a little not quite the best, but overall this is a fantastic game, and I would really recommend it to anyone who is a Fire Emblem fan. Really, really fun. Number 4 is kind of a unique one with ROM hacks. So obviously that is not just a single game, it is the most insane variety of games that you could possibly hope to get. But you know, with me saying most of the games on this list you can easily get 50 hours playtime out of, as soon as you open up this can of worms, it's like, man, you can get hundreds and hundreds of hours of playtime from ROM hacks. This is one of my favorite ways to just find new content that revolves around Fire Emblem, Tactics Ogre. I've even seen some Valkyria Chronicles ones. Tons of ways that you can do ROM hacks. So for this, I'll mostly be showing a couple of Fire Emblem ones that I found really, really fun. But the idea with ROM hacks is that it's fan-made games that are using, generally, in this case, one of the Fire Emblem games is kind of the base for it. And some of them just do like reskins where you have different units, different balancing, enemies, and it can be really fun to play through the game with all these kind of subtle changes to really blatant changes. But some of the ROM hacks out there, like, they are basically just entire new Fire Emblem games. People have created, you know, absolutely massive amounts of content for these, with tons of story, really cool systems that they have found a way to implement into Fire Emblem, such as the skills system put into Game Boy Advance Fire Emblems. And yeah, ROM hacks are absolutely a fantastic way to play Fire Emblem. I will say, probably the biggest negative with them is that it does take a bit of work if you aren't into this scene already to, you know, figure out how you want to emulate these games, because obviously they aren't like real games that you can get cartridges for. Me personally, I love using just my phone to use a free emulator on the Game Boy Advance games, and then I use like Dolphin on my computer for GameCube, Wii games. But in addition to finding a way to emulate them, it does take a bit of work to figure out how to patch the files onto one of the Fire Emblem games, make it run all right. There are ways around this. There are lots of Discord servers out there that are built around Fire Emblem hacking and other games that will be able to just directly give you the ROMs that are already patched, so you can just plug those straight into your emulator and go from there. But, you know, from what I've heard, it is pretty strict on how you can acquire those ROMs, so it might require you to do a bit of digging, figure out, you know, the best way for you if you like patching them yourself. But it is very worth that work, because there are so many really cool games out there that are fan-made that absolutely draw you into their worlds that they have created with these awesome, amazing, just the base Fire Emblem designs that we all know and love. In addition to kind of that main con with these, I would say one of the other ones is that there are also a lot of unfinished projects out there that, you know, you might still find and download and get halfway through, and then it's like, okay, that's all we have so far, and, you know, they're either unfinished for now or unfinished forever. So it is definitely kind of a patchwork of lots of absolutely amazing quality and just works in progress, people that got into it but never finished projects. So it does take a little bit more effort to get into than a lot of these other games that are just buy a game, one and done. But it is so much fun. And the last thing that I will say, in addition to all kind of these fan-made hacks, my personal favorite is randomizers. Like, it is my favorite way to play Fire Emblem, is with a randomizer. Probably the best system out there is called Une, that lets you just do a universal randomizer for Fire Emblem 4 and then 6 through 9. So that's all of the Game Boy Advance ones, Genealogy of the Holy War, and Path of Radiance. I absolutely love using the randomizers for those games. You can kind of set up all of the different criteria that you want to randomize on, if you want people to change stats, if you want them to have different skills and abilities, or even if you want to have the characters and the recruitment order completely randomized. You can also change the weapons randomized and like make it so that you have a chance of getting a iron sword that has a devil backfire effect, you know, like, it's just absolutely amazing. I love playing through these games again on randomizers, and no matter kind of what aspect of these Fire Emblem hacks or other ROM hacks that you would like to get into, I would highly encourage you. It is worth the work, you know. It took me a second to figure out how to get into, but I have had so much fun playing these games. It is absolutely incredible, and that's why it's at number 4. At number 3 is King's Bounty 2, and this is honestly pretty different from a lot of the other ones. It definitely still has that tactics, you know, gameplay and combat, but this one is actually hex-based, which Normally, I am not a fan of hex-based. I prefer just the regular square grid so much more, but for this game, it works really well. And that kind of has to go into more of how the combat is set up. But this game is more of an adventure and tactics game than just a pure tactics game where you're going straight from battle to battle or like have a little base phase in between. This one, you are exploring basically an open world. You're finding, you know, random items and caches that you can sell for gold or find new equipment, and it's pretty fun. It's very different from a lot of the games in this genre, so it feels like playing a very different game, but it still has that same great core combat that, you know, really is something that I enjoy. So there are kind of 4 main factions or ideals that your character will be a part of, and also all of the units that you can get will be a part of. You kind of have a main character, and you are just controlling an army that's made up of up to 5 squads, and these units can be in any of the kind of 4 main ideals of power or finesse, or order and anarchy.
This statue.
They have those kind of 2 dichotomies between the sets, and each of the ideals has a ton of really unique skills that your main character can get that affect your units, out of battle effects, as well as the units are very different from each of the different ideals. So it's really fun. I've actually beat this game 4 times just using different combinations. Like, the replayability with these different ideals, different units, different playstyles is immense. Because in addition to that, there are also 3 main characters that you can choose that all have their different kind of strengths and weaknesses. You have the pure battle combat one, the like pure spellcaster, and then you have somebody who's kind of in the middle, and it's fun to balance all of those because the combat is really cool. Units all have different abilities, different attack, defense ratings, you know, different movement speed, very good variety in between all of the units. But then as far as like your main character in battle, you can have access to the spell book to aid your units, and the spell casting is amazing. I love the spell casting systems in this game. Like, my first playthrough, I really wanted to go spell casting. It looked cool, and oh man, by the end you get a talent that you can level up in kind of your main character's tree that lets you cast up to 2 spells per round, and you're just like sending chain lightnings around the enemy team, calling in meteors, summoning chimeras. Like, the magic is really, really cool, and I love how it's implemented where, you know, if you're really pursuing the magical side, your units themselves probably won't be as strong as if you went pure combat, but you have that balance of you're then able to supplement them with crazy strong magical abilities, and you might like just never even get touched by using a combination of your unit spells and abilities and your spells and just wiping the enemy team before they have a turn, or going pure combat and just rushing down the enemy and obliterating them so that they have nothing left by the time that their turns get around. I love the combat in this game. It is amazing. Even and outside of that, you know, with the character tree, you get a level up your main character perks. You also have your units level up slowly, just 3 ranks kind of, and each rank they get a little stronger. So nothing too crazy in terms of like units growth. Most of the growth is your main character growing that makes your unit stronger. But in addition to just level ups and skills, you also have a wide variety of gear that buff different stats, buff different things for your units. So there is a lot of customization in how you like to build your army. After that, really the only cons is that late game, your unit variety is kind of limited. Like, there are the kind of ultimate strongest tier 5 units for each ideal, and it's basically like, once you get them, there's not really much like further that you can possibly do to change up your unit, variety. Like you can decide on maybe the supporting units or other people that you think have good abilities that support them, but it's like you kind of, for the last little section of the game, aren't really finding many stronger units because you just have all the best ones that are available to you. Which, it's still super fun because those units are absolutely crazy and it's a lot of fun. The other con is that for me personally, I have this game on Switch and the walking speed of the main character is horrendous. It can take a long time to walk around and to get in between places, especially if you open up your map and see that you left a treasure chest by the side of the road a while back and you're just like, oh, it's like 2 minutes away to walk back, just not quite that far, and there isn't a fast travel point nearby it. Is it really worth it for the single treasure chest? Yeah, it's just funny, and I have heard that if you're getting it on Steam or on something else, there are plenty of mods out there that increase walking speed. So personally, I would recommend looking into that and seeing if that's something that you would be interested in, because yeah, the walking speed is horrendous. Outside of just those few little gripes, really, really fun game, absolutely phenomenal. Like I said, I finished it 4 times. It is amazing. Number 2 on the list is Massive Chalice, which is a hilarious name. And they even kind of make fun of it throughout, where it's this giant chalice that has these 2 personalities inside, that their power basically keeps you as a tactician alive, and their whole goal is to help you survive for 300 years against a undying enemy. Sounds pretty hilarious, right? So you are the tactician that gets to stay alive and kind of manage everything. You have a team of heroes, and as you might be able to guess, surviving 300 years, this is a kind of creating bloodlines and inheritance system type of survival. Really, really cool take on that, where basically you can have your main set of 5 heroes that are going into battle, and then outside of battle, you get to kind of manage. Once you create keeps for a bloodline, you can basically retire heroes from the battlefield to then sire their bloodlines, that the children that they have will inherit some of the traits that they have, both positive and negative. One of the ones that I swear my people always get and just passes down so much throughout the bloodlines is being drunks and alcoholics, so that randomly through the battle, at the start of the battle, they might show up drunk and they will wobble like crazy as they're moving across the battlefield. It messes up some of their accuracy and movement. Random funny skills like that. And then of course lots of other skills like leveling up faster, having increased accuracy, damage, health, or negative skills like not being very fertile, that they will have a harder time having children if you want to use them as the kind of main lords of a keep, creating the bloodline. So really fun inheritance system with skills. You can also earn artifacts, basically like stronger weapons, for a bloodline if somebody in that bloodline performs exceptionally well, and they will pass on those artifacts to people in their bloodline, and the artifact gets stronger the better you do with them, the more kills you get. And so it's really, really cool system of inheritances. And in addition to the bloodlines, you also get a ton of different research options that allow you to increase the base level for all of your units, whether it be weapons, armor, different items and consumables that they can use in battle. And that allows you to have a sense of progression. Even though your heroes are constantly getting replaced by younger units, you will be able to create academies that you will be able to have your younger units start off at higher levels by learning from some of the heroes that you have sent through battle already. You can have so much to do with the research, and just everything in this game management wise is amazing. I love it. And then the battle itself, the combat, is really, really fun. There's basically 3 base classes of a great big melee unit that uses a battering ram to hit their enemies, an alchemist with claws that throws grenades, and a hunter that has a giant crossbow. And then there are also subclasses that you get from mixing those units in the bloodline. So if you have one of the crossbow hunters marry an alchemist, then their children will have explosive crossbows, or, there's a whole range of the subclasses that are really, really cool. Leveling your units is also really fun because then you get to kind of pick out their skills, and because you have 300 years to survive, you get to really play around with which of the skills for every single subclass do you like, and they include like new active abilities in battle, just extra strengths and abilities that they can use, doing extra damage to enemies below half health. Like, really, really cool system. And honestly, throwing grenades at enemies will always be the most satisfying thing in this game. Sorry, I think they're called flasks, but basically grenades. It's just so much fun to play this game. Absolutely love it. This is seriously an amazing game, and on top of all of that amazing stuff, you also, throughout the entire game, get the witty banter of the two Chalice personages, arguing, encouraging you, talking about what's going on. It's kind of fun. Can get old, but it is lots of fun. And then there is great difficulty throughout the entire game, and you have lots of really cool enemies that you fight. Seriously, one of the best strategy games out there, and it is amazing. And before we get to the number one game on the list, I would like to include just two honorable mentions that are both really amazing, but were kind of unique and different enough from the others on the list that they warranted their own spots. The first honorable mention is Berwick Saga, which the only reason that it is an honorable mention and is not the number one game on this list is I think it might be like a little too well known, if only by reputation, not maybe by everybody playing it, because it is one of the infamous Kaga Saga games that Shozo Kaga made, the original creator of Fire Emblem, after he left Intelligent Systems. So for that reason alone, I think that I'm putting it here as an honorable mention. But if you have not played this game, this is by far my number one recommendation to you. This is absolutely a phenomenal game. Oh my goodness. It is amazing. It's got honestly a ton of unique stuff that just scream Kaga's innovation in this genre. So one of the most interesting things that spans the entire game is the way that combat turns work. Instead of having just a player and enemy phase, the kind of system is a breakup in between player, enemy, kind of going back and forth. But I like the way that Berwick Saga did it more than any of the other games that have tried to kind of mix up the whole team takes a turn. Generally, you get a kind of speed stat or something like that, a weight stat, whatever it is, that determines your character's turn order. And one of the most annoying things with that is honestly then just using any heavy character or slow character feels so crappy, because by the time that the battle is over, they might have taken 5 turns and your fastest character's taken 7, and it just feels worse to use heavy characters. I don't love it. Like, yes, it can be fun to work around speed, and Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together is probably one of my top 3, if not my number 1 strategy game of all time, and that uses the speed system, so no way am I saying that like ruins a game. But I love the way that Berwick Saga does it. The way that it does it is it just spaces it out based on how many units there are from each side, and you can use your move slot for any character on the map. So generally the player gets the first turn. You can move whatever character you want first, and then say that the enemy has twice as many units as you on this current map. The enemy will get the next 2 turns, they will also move whoever they want. And then you get another turn, move whoever you want, enemy gets there too, it goes back and forth until you finish the turn, and then the next turn starts and the player gets the first move again. And, you know, eventually if you whittle it down to a 1-to-1 ratio, then it's just you and the enemy taking turns, you know, consecutively, no double turns for everybody. And I love this system. It is so interesting because you can do so much with it. If you know that there's like a giant ambush waiting, then you can save your very last move to go in and break the ambush and, you know, spot characters that are hiding, because that's a mechanic in this game. Do whatever, you know. And then the next turn starts and you get the first turn, and that same character that you moved last can double turn, clear out, you know, 2 enemies out of the ambush, really, you know, break through enemy lines, use that to finish off a boss before they get a turn against you. It is so incredibly satisfying to use the system to your benefit, because the enemy will do their best to use it to their benefit too. They 100% will wait with some of their units until you're in range, and then have those units take their move last so they can actually attack you. They will also use their first turn, like almost always, to try and finish off a unit that's weakened. Like, the system is really great because it doesn't necessarily favor the player, but it gives you so many options that you can use to your benefit that it feels really rewarding. And man, that is just one of the things in this game. I could go on about this game forever. It is so, so good. The next things that I will say about this game kind of more generally, the story is fantastic. I really enjoyed the story and the way that it manages to kind of tell a grand scope story, but very personalized down to a lot of the characters that are in your army in very reasonable and logical ways, not just a chosen one for the sake of being a chosen one. I mean, yes, let's go with that. And the system of managing your army when you're back in the city, in the castle town, is a lot of fun, with all the shops, with just different systems for managing which units get horses, which items you'd like to create at the atelier. There's tons of side quests and characters, NPCs to talk to that progress unit storylines. There's a lot to do in the town in between quests, and one of the coolest things about it is that there is also a mercenary system where you have your core group of knights. They will stick with you no matter what, but you can also hire mercenaries to join your crew, and you're paying basically, you know, kind of based on how strong the mercenary is. Everyone has their individual rates, and then also a little extra for whatever level they are. So if you absolutely, you know, just funnel everything into one mercenary, they'll start getting really expensive. But that can be mitigated because every single mercenary also has certain criteria for joining your army permanently. They are extremely obscure. Honestly, Berwick Saga is one of the few games that I would recommend looking things up if you are concerned about losing characters, because yeah, it can be really obscure. I played blind through my first time and I lost probably 3 or 4 mercenaries that I like actually wanted to keep. Yeah, it can be very, very interesting the way that it works, and that system is used for getting mercenaries to stay with your army permanently. Even class changing and promoting has really random, wild requirements for a lot of units. It's really fun. A couple other really interesting things are the shields and horses, where you can equip shields on many characters and they will have a % chance to use them depending on their skill and the shields. That gives them increased defense when they block, but then shields have a chance of breaking and they lose them. Horses are also units that you give to your units that are capable of riding, and horses go from kind of like the very bottom thin horse that has very little health and no special benefits to horses that give speed boosts, horses that give movement boosts, have more health, are stronger. It's really cool, and they take their damage when you get hit as well, so you have to kind of try and maintain your army's horses, but they're also expensive to purchase, the really good ones. There's so much going on that's just amazing in this game. It's so fun, and if you have not played this game as a fan of the tactical genre, I would recommend this game over almost anything else. I will say a couple of cons about this game. It is only in Japanese originally, so you are going to have to find fan translations to English. There are extremely good, well-made ones. I don't think I even noticed really any grammatical errors or weird translations. Like, they have done a fantastic job, but it just takes a little work. You might have to look up a guide on how to get them. And this game can be extremely difficult, especially if you are trying to go through blind without a guide. There are certain chapters that are just absolutely ridiculous and throw some basically impossible to predict stuff at you. And there is no choice in difficulty level, so you are stuck kind of going through on the way that it was designed, which is pretty difficult, especially when you don't know how to abuse some of the systems. But again, this is the game that I've talked about the longest, and it's supposed to be an honorable mention. It's ridiculous. This game is amazing. If you're interested, please try it out and let me know how amazing it is. I am excited to hear. The second honorable mention is a game called Fort Triumph, which is just absolute wacky, silly, simple fun. It is extremely well made and has a really fun campaign mode that just has hilarious over-the-top jokes, great, absolute fantastic acting. So why is this game only an honorable mention? Because it is extremely short. That campaign probably takes like 5 to 10 hours to complete, and then that's really kind of it for designed out content. But where this game shines is that it is very sandboxy, and you can kind of create your own matches against AI and just have a lot of fun messing with all of the settings that they give for you to control. But the reason why it is still on this honorable mention list, despite being so short, is specifically because of the multiplayer. A multiplayer tactics game is really rare to find. Like, most games in this genre are pretty set on being single player, and that's the way that they want it. But this is just absolute ridiculous, hilarious multiplayer fun, with the combat being super physics based and really over the top in the animations of like dropping pillars on each other and sending each other flying into exploding pots and everything. It is a ton of fun for the multiplayer aspect of it. And yeah, if that's something that you're looking for, this would probably be one of my top multiplayer games in the tactics genre, because, you know, there's like 3 total. But beyond that, the combat in this game is actually incredibly well made for how simple this game is. Like, they put a lot of love and care into this for how over the top, silly, and fun the kind of characters and the overall tone of the game is. There's a ton of enemy variety, which is really impressive, and there's a lot to do on the world maps in each game that you create, where each game is kind of its own self-contained world, and you can be exploring, finding all sorts of enemies to level up on, also get loot, and then slowly build up your castle and your income so that you can have larger teams of heroes, more teams of heroes, better defenses, better equipment. There's, you know, pretty simple idea of like exploring, building yourself up so that by the time you find the enemy, you can beat their army and then eventually get to their base and take it over. But there's a lot of, you know, individual moving parts that goes into it, a ton of really cool items and abilities. You have a lot of customization on your heroes as they level up. Just because you have 2 heroes of the same class doesn't mean that their level up options are the same. So you can have a super tanky archer or a mage that also like kicks people halfway across the map. So there's a ton of really fun stuff in here. and I love having just the classes and their base abilities are a lot of fun, and then being able to customize all of those other skills. Really great game, and very rare to be a multiplayer focused game where the single player aspect is kind of lacking, but still really fun. Honestly, would be a recommend from me, and that comes in as the end of our honorable mentions. And the number one most underrated game is Brigandine, Legend of Runersia. This is an amazing game. It is seriously the most addicting strategy tactics game I have ever played. Basically, the land of Runersia must be united, and you have 6 nations to choose from to accomplish that purpose. The really cool thing is each nation has a very unique backstory, lore, and really cool characters. The main characters are what are called Rune Knights, which are basically these powerful warriors that can also control squads of monsters, and that makes up what your army has. I really love all of the units. All of the Rune Knight classes are really fun to work with, to be able to, fall in love with whatever your favorite classes are. And the monsters are absolutely amazing. They are so unique. And one of my personal favorite things is you can actually rename the monsters, give them nicknames. So it's almost kind of like you have these like main knights that are controlling, and then you can like throw in all of your favorite character names, friends names, stuff with the monsters and get those attachments to them. Kind of like, a good old Nuzlocke with Pokemon. Build that emotional attachment so that when they die, it really hurts. It is amazing. I just love everything about the way that the units are set up in this game, and the combat is fantastic. Again, this is a game with the hex system, which, I still maintain that I am not a huge fan of it, but somehow, like, right here towards the high end of all of the games, there's a lot of these hex systems that are cropping up, and I actually love how they handled it in this one. One of the personal things that bugs me about the hex system is it feels like there's not really as many choke points. You just get into these massive dog piles of units because every, hex is connected to a lot more options than when you're just doing a grid-based system. But that actually works really well with kind of the control zone and the entrapment features that Brigandine has, where any unit that you have basically has a control zone surrounding it, so that an enemy unit can only move 1 hex at a time within your control zone. So if somebody is directly in front of you, they can only move 1 hex to either side or get out of your control zone and go around. So it makes it so that you actually can protect back units even with kind of the lack of choke points on most of the maps and with the hex system, by setting up enough frontliners that their control zones prevent anybody from getting to your backline in one turn. So again, the hex system is not my favorite, but this game actually takes steps to fix some of the problems that I have with it. The other thing that it does is the entrapment, which is where if you're on opposite sides of a enemy, or I think the actual technical thing is that if your monsters or control zones take up all 6 surrounding hexes of an enemy, which the easiest way to do that is just place 1 unit on either side of them, and then their control zone will encompass all 6 hexes around, then it basically chains them down where they lose a bunch of evasion, and they also have normally like a 10% chance more likely to be crit, sometimes more. And that is really fun because it kind of makes it rewarding to break out of just making a giant dog pile, because you want to like kind of pull in and surround the enemies that are attacking you so that you can be able to get that accuracy buff as well as crit damage. So the actual combat itself, you have basically most of your units will have your basic skills. that include like regular attacks, maybe something special, and all skills and magic are split into basically able to be used no matter what, and then able to be used if you haven't moved that turn. Those are the two types, and they denote it with these little like feet with an X by them, which, you know, you pull up your skills and you can see very clearly, okay, these ones I can't use if I have moved already this turn. And that is a really cool way of balancing crazy strong skills and magic abilities, because basically all magic has to be stationary to cast. And that basically allows a lot of really fun decision making of, if you want to rush in, then you're allowing the enemy to stand still, but you're getting kind of the first strike. You can maybe take out some units, get status effects on people. And if you want to draw the enemy into you, then you get to hit back really hard, but you have to make sure that you have a good enough defense that they won't like break through and kill monsters, because monsters do have permadeath in this. Your Rune Knights will be taken out of commission for a month basically, but monsters do have permadeath, which is really cool. I actually really like that, you know, it still feels like there are stakes in each battle, because, you know, this monster you've been training up to try and become like the strongest lich that you can. If he gets killed while he's right before level 20 or something like that, it really hurts. But the one nice thing is, if you do kill a Rune Knight during combat, then their entire squad retreats with them. So if you have a Rune Knight that has, you know, 6 monsters as part of his team, and you just focus the Rune Knight, burst him down, then all 6 of those monsters will leave with him, and they even have a chance of being left behind to be captured. So you might get one of those monsters that failed to escape with the Rune Knight if you kill the Rune Knight. So that always makes a kind of fun little like decision making of, if you're just starting to invade one of the enemy nations, you know, it's their first base that you're attacking, you can really try to do a serious blow to their army by taking out all the monsters that you can and then the Rune Knights, so that they can't just retreat and next month still have all the same monsters but just use a different Rune Knight if you just burst down the Rune Knight. But then you can also try to take that gamble of like, do I leave some of the monsters alive in order to try and capture them? Because every nation normally starts with at least 1 or 2 really powerful monsters in the main campaign, that if you can capture those, that is like a huge boost to your army. But yeah, combat, really fun. Outside of just Rune Knights, the leader of every nation, if they're ever on the field and they get killed, then their entire team will retreat no matter what. So the leaders are kind of like an instant defeat button, but they are generally by far the most powerful Rune Knights. So it's very fun to have the balancing that they have done in this game. I really like it. Makes it so that you can pull off some like crazy victories when you're way underpowered if you just focus Rune Knights and leaders, and it allows you to just have a lot of options of how you want to go about the battle. Outside of battle, there is also a lot of very interesting behind the scenes going on, and other quests and ways that you can strengthen your army. But personally, I do like how it isn't overwhelming outside of battle. Basically, you have the option to summon new monsters that will start off at level 1, and the type of monsters you can summon are different depending on which castle you are summoning from, which is really fun because as you start a new game, every nation will have different monsters that they have access to. And every monster that you summon has a chance of being mana blessed, which basically just gives them a huge boost to their stats and also makes them basically look like a shiny Pokemon. You have a different palette change, like glowing effects in battle. It's really just kind of awesome to have these mana blessed monsters, and they are really strong, especially if you can train them up from level 1 all the way up until their promotions and everything. it's really worth it for these Mana Blessed ones. They come out significantly stronger than the regulars, but it is just a % chance to get summoned, and so you generally can't fill your entire army with Mana Blessed monsters, as you're only getting a little bit of mana every month, depending on how many castles you own. Again, I feel like they've done a really good job at balancing for fun in this game. There are lots of ways that you can, you know, abuse some of the most broken abilities and win fights easily, but there is a ton of fun to be had just with all of the systems in this game. Outside of summoning monsters, you can also send knights on quests in which that month they will be unable to battle or defend a castle, but on the quest they can gain experience to level themselves and their monsters up, or go looking for equipment and new knights. So that's kind of a, you know, never-ending cycle throughout the playthrough, that you're wanting to get new knights and strengthen your army so that as you conquer more of the land, you can have more defenders, you can have more people going out on quests and getting better equipment. And the equipment is actually really in-depth and cool. There's an element system where you might have, honestly probably the easiest example are just the elemental dragons, because you can have them in all elements. You have a fire dragon and a ice dragon, or water element basically. And because the blue element beats the red element, you will get bonus damage and accuracy against the fire dragon as the ice dragon attacking, but you can also get equipment that strengthens that. You can make it so that instead of having 2 water element on the ice dragon, you get something that gives him an extra 2, so you now have 4 water elements. So instead of just this slight bonus against a fire dragon, you have a massive bonus against a fire dragon. But if you were to attack a green element lightning dragon, then the 4 elemental water element that you have, if say that dragon had 4 green element, you would lose all 4 of those matchups, and so you would end up doing less damage. It's really cool, really in depth, and you can kind of mix and match. Like if you want to have a water dragon that has a fire weapon attached, then you get your first 2 elements being water and your last 2 being fire. Can kind of mix and match. You can increase your defenses that way. You can increase your stats through equipment. There is so much variety in the equipment that makes it really fun every playthrough, as you're just randomly getting equipment from quests and trying to use those the best ways that you can. Outside of the main campaign, which is really fun, but everybody kind of starts off with their nation well established, tons of knights and monsters. You generally have kind of the Jagan archetype of one strong advisor / general in your army that's like already a tier 3 unit in the main campaign. So going outside of that to a mode called challenge mode is my personal favorite, and that is how I have replayed this game so many times. I think I've beaten this game like 14 times now. But yes, in challenge mode, you start with just the capital of the group of the nation that you want to start with. So you do not have any lands, you have very low income, so you can't summon tons of monsters right from the start, and you get to start with whatever leader of the nation you're choosing and 9 other knights, and you get to pick which knights you want, and everybody starts at level 1 on the entire map, including enemies. And I love challenge mode. It is so much fun. There's a point system to have like some additional just goals and objectives, where if you take over multiple castles in a single turn, if you win a battle with only 1 knight with 1 squad instead of using all 3, you get bonus points that unlock extra items and extra monsters, promotion stuff throughout the run, but it also keeps track of it at the end of the run in your save file for that, in your completed save file. So you know, you can like be playing through as all the different nations and see which nation you can get the highest point total with. It's absolutely so incredibly fun and a ton of replayability. One of my favorite things to do is to like pick a certain monster type and try and like use that a ton in my army. So like have an army full of dragons and see if I can beat the whole game with that instead of going more balanced and making it so that every single one of my rune knights is a melee sword fighter knight class. Like there's a ton of really fun challenge add-ons that you can give yourself just with how open the game is, especially in challenge mode. And yeah, there is just so much to do in this game. I love how it looks. The design of the characters is amazing, even if a couple of the characters are like way over the top in their design, but the monsters all look incredible. I will say you definitely do notice that like every rune knight has this beautiful art that they have, but then once you get onto the field, most of them just use their class sprite and don't have anything unique on the field outside of like your leaders and a few other special cases, which I 100% get that if that's, you know, limits of budgets and everything. If this game ever gets a sequel, I would love to see them be able to do more unique battle animations and sprites and everything, because this game is just absolutely gorgeous and I love how it looks despite some of the flaws and weaknesses that it has. The sound design is also really amazing and just a joy to listen to. The OST has a ton of really cool sound effects, but I will say the level up sound effect is, you know, the same little jingle every single time, and if you send a bunch of low level monsters out on experience quests with their knights, oh my goodness, that level up sound effect gets absolutely awful to listen to. I will pause for a second so you can get a taste of it. Yeah, it's pretty bad, so honestly it makes me kind of just want to skip through a lot of the level up times when I sent out monsters on quests and stuff, but overall sound design is amazing. This is just one of, honestly, probably like outside of main Fire Emblem Tactics Ogre XCOM series, this is the tactics game that I have the most amount of hours in and still love it to this day. Honestly, replaying and beating this for my 14th time was what sparked the idea to do this as a video, of wanting to share my love for these underappreciated games. So for all of you who have stuck with me through this incredibly long dive into underrated strategy games, as well as anyone who just happened to skip to see number 1 and is still here, thank you all so much for your support. I would love to hear other games that you guys have in mind and your thoughts on these games after you give them a try. With that, hope you all have a wonderful day, and catch you in the next one.